there is an ongoing debate. If you were to give the most precise definition of life, what would it consist of? Is the possession of free will an essential characteristic of life? Why do some quantum scientists suggest that the fundamental difference between life and death is order and chaos? According to the traditional understanding of biology, a living organism is a cellular form of existence. This way of being is essentially the chemical components of those cells, which are constantly renewing themselves. This view recognizes the progression of life from inorganic to organic matter and makes a connection between inorganic matter in nature and life. Opponents of this view suggest that the origin of life is highly random. For example, life that forms in a different biochemical environment or on a different planet may not be carbon-based at all, it may be silicon-based. So, it's a little too absolute to define organic matter as a necessary form of life. So, more scientists have decided to think differently. They try to define life in terms of what it does and how it works. For example, some scientists define life in terms of functions such as self-reproduction, metabolism, and genetic evolution. Others define life as a flexible, adaptive system. The essence of life processes is the transfer of information. All these ideas have one thing in common. They all define life in terms of the familiar structure of living organisms on Earth. The science at the bottom of the hierarchy of biology is physics, which is universally applicable to the entire universe. In response to the question of how to define life, Erwin Schrödinger, a Nobel Prize-winning quantum physicist, explained life in terms of quantum mechanics. He said that the essence of life is to avoid disturbing the inner order and to resist entropy. What does that mean? Take an example. Here's a bunch of disorganized blocks, and even though it looks chaotic at first, by putting energy into it, we can create order and make it maintain that order. That's what life does. For example, take the organisms on our planet. Every living thing on this planet is made up of cells. A cell is like a small protein-based robot. It has a special function that gives life its unique characteristics. It has a wall that separates it from its surroundings and creates internal order. It regulates itself and maintains a constant state. It eats and absorbs energy to stay alive. It grows and develops. It reacts to its environment. It evolves. It reproduces itself. So why do some quantum scientists suggest that the fundamental difference between life and death is order and chaos? Why isn't the possession of free will an essential characteristic of life? Welcome to Audible Wisdom. The book we're reading is Life, the leading edge of evolutionary biology, genetics, anthropology, and environmental science by John Brockman. 1. Is free will an essential characteristic of life? We've often said that the essential difference between life and non-life is free will. Living things can always choose their own behavior on their own initiative. But the example of Toxoplasma gondii raises the question of whether life has free will at all. Does life have free will? And more than that, it also turns our view of the biological chain on its head. Toxoplasma is a very common parasite which can be carried by a wide range of theropods. Robert Saborski, a neuroscientist at Stanford Medical School, discovered that Toxoplasma gondii can only reproduce most efficiently in the intestines of cats. To increase the survival rate of its offspring, Toxoplasma gondii must be able to return to the cat's intestine after it's been passed from the cat's intestine. This is where the rat unwittingly becomes a carrier of Toxoplasma gondii. Rodents such as rats often eat cat feces. And one of Toxoplasma's evolutionary strategies is to control animal behavior as much as possible, to make it easier for cats to eat mice. But making it easier for cats to eat mice is no easy task. In the lab, if you put some cat urine in one corner of the cage, the mice will run to the other side of the cage. This is because cat urine contains cat pheromones. When the mouse smells the cat pheromones, it gets scared. So what does toxoplasmosis do? Sapolsky found this in his experiments. Rats infected with Toxoplasma gondii would not be afraid of the cat's scent, but would be attracted to it. The rats would become excited, even fearless, and boldly approach the cat to check its scent. This behavior was fatal to the rats, but it increases the chances that the mouse will be eaten by the cat, which fortunately allows the Toxoplasma gondii to find its new host. Toxoplasma not only makes mice brave, it can change people. Sapolsky presented the results of some neuropsychological tests. Compared to healthy people, toxoplasma-infected people are 3 to 4 times more likely to die in car accidents caused by speeding. So what is it about toxoplasma? Why does toxoplasma make organisms risk-averse? Recent life science research has shown that Toxoplasma gondii has a mammalian gene in its genome. This gene encodes an enzyme that is used to synthesize dopamine. In other words, Toxoplasma gondii, by controlling chemicals in the host brain, makes the host excited and adventurous and ultimately controls the host behavior. The example of toxoplasma shows us how organisms have evolved to survive. Toxoplasma looks like a lowly protozoan. By contrast, mice, cats, and humans all appear to be higher mammals. But as it evolved, Toxoplasma gondii found a clever way to keep its genes alive. Toxoplasma gondii's domination of animal behavior tells us something. The idea that life is inherently superior or inferior is probably just wishful thinking. From the perspective of genetic continuity, all organisms have evolved to develop strategies that work best for them. All life as we see it today is a successor in adapting to our current environment. Evolution is an imprecise term. In a moment, we'll look at the example of the bird beak. We'll see, in the evolution of life, life not only evolves, it also degenerates. Going back to the example of Toxoplasma gondii, it also makes us rethink what we call the free will of life. By free will, we usually mean the ability of life to control its own destiny. Life is capable of actively choosing between possible options and acting on them. But the toxoplasmosis case was a shock to us. We suddenly realized that the personality and behavior of what we thought was a superior mammal could be altered by a tiny parasite. Our supposed free will to live became less reliable. At the same time, as we got deeper and deeper into computer programs, we're discovering more and more similarities between computer programs and the way DNA programs life. It makes us wonder if life has free will at all. Life seems to follow the programs that DNA has programmed us to do. What we think of as free will is actually a genetic program we've been programmed with. Take humans, for example. People refuse to eat too much sugar for rational health reasons. But many people can't stop eating sweets, even though they know that eating too much sugar increases the likelihood of obesity. It raises blood sugar, blood lipids, blood pressure, and accelerates aging. The reason is that our genes have programmed our bodies so that when people eat sweets, their brains produce dopa, which gives them a sense of euphoria and pleasure. And the reason our genes programmed our bodies to do this is because in primitive societies, food was scarce, and the high energy content of sugar could be stored in the body to stave off hunger. Despite the abundance of food today, our genes have programmed our bodies to never stop eating sweets. Whether we admit it or not, our genes have programmed our bodies to pass on the genetic message first and foremost. Maybe we're never as independent as we think we are. What we think are our own personalities and habits are like programs that run our computers, genetically controlling us. You may ask, isn't life always evolving? Why haven't genes evolved to adapt to the changing environment? That's because life not only evolves, it also degenerates. 2. Evolution and deterioration of a bird's beak. Let's look at an example of a bird's beak. It makes us rethink the evolution of living things. When Darwin traveled to the Galapagos Islands on the Beagle, it was comparing the similarities and differences in the shape of birds' beaks on different islands that inspired him to think about the origin of species. Later, the American evolutionary biologists Mr. and Mrs. Grant also made long-term observations and research in the Galapagos Islands and made many new discoveries. These discoveries have led us to rethink the mechanisms by which life evolves and Darwin's theory of evolution. What if there were a drought on the islands? How would that affect the beaks of the surviving birds? When food is plentiful, birds on small islands have a wide variety of beaks of different shapes and sizes. After natural selection through the drought, only those birds with strong beaks will be able to pry open the hard shells of plant seeds to get at the food and survive. In other words, when the environment becomes hostile, birds have evolved to adapt. But the environment doesn't stay the same forever. What if the environment improves? Let's take the beak as an example. A species will continue to interbreed and merge long after the environment gets better. Mr. and Mrs. Grant's observations of bird beaks in the Galapagos Islands have revealed both the positive and negative aspects of this. On the one hand, as environmental conditions worsen, species evolve special traits that are adapted to the environment. On the other hand, when conditions improve, the species that have begun to separate begin to interbreed and produce offspring. This interbreeding doesn't appear to be evolution, but rather a regression of some kind of bodily function. In fact, many of the functions of the human body are regressing compared to those of our ancestors. This is because humans are intelligent beings and not like other creatures. Instead of adapting to our environment, we've adapted it to make it easier to live in. In other words, the living conditions of human beings have improved, but at the cost of the deterioration of some of our bodily functions. Except for the fact that our brains have become more advanced, we're no longer able to jump from tree to tree with the same strong limbs as our ancestors. We've lost the strength and agility of our ancestors, and the better physical environment has made intermarriage between different groups of people more common. It's a way for the human species to merge into a better environment. That's what the beak example teaches us. Organisms don't just evolve, they degenerate. That is our understanding of life from an evolutionary perspective. The science that's even more fundamental than biology is physics, which is universally applicable to the entire universe. As we said before, the question of how to define life. The quantum physicist Erwin Schrödinger defined life in terms of quantum mechanics. He said, "The essence of life is to avoid disturbance of the internal order and to resist the increase of entropy." So how did Schrödinger figure out the nature of life from quantum mechanics? The essence of life is to resist the increase of entropy. Under what circumstances can we say that an object is alive? Schrödinger, the founder of quantum mechanics, answered, "Life means that something is actively and continuously doing something to maintain a stable order in its body. For example, it's constantly moving, constantly exchanging matter with the environment, and so on. If a system isn't alive, then when it's placed in an isolated environment, all of its movements will usually be stopped by friction, like a battery that runs out of juice. A fire in a fireplace goes out. These inanimate objects become dead weight. Physicists call this state maximum entropy. The German scientist Clausius first introduced the concept of entropy in 1865. It's a measure of how chaotic a system is. Schrödinger told us that entropy is a physical quantity that can be measured. At absolute zero, the entropy of any object is zero. As the temperature increases, the entropy of an object increases. The more chaotic a system is, the more entropy it has. The dead state of inanimate objects that we've just mentioned is actually the state where the system is at its maximum level of chaos. In this state, the temperature of each part of the system has already become uniform due to heat conduction. That's why it's called thermodynamic equilibrium. Let's take some examples, like a bottle. If it sits still on a table, its entropy is minimized. If you throw it on the ground, the bottle breaks. The inside of the bottle becomes disorganized and has no rules, so the entropy increases. Another example is when a person runs for a while, sweating and panting. The organic matter in the body is consumed and expelled in the form of carbon dioxide and water, and the chaos of the human system also increases, which is also a reflection of the increase in entropy. Through these examples, do you realize that, in fact, all systems in their natural state have a tendency to increase in entropy? This is the meaning of the second law of thermodynamics. Any isolated system will spontaneously evolve toward a state of maximum damage. That is, it will naturally become more chaotic. And that's true of everything in the world. It's also true of living things, whether it's walking, breathing, or the beating of the heart. All living things increase their entropy all the time. When does the entropy increase stop? When the entropy of a creature reaches its maximum. All the atoms that make up that creature will return to the universe in the most chaotic state possible. Dust to dust, earth to earth. So it's clear that the end of entropy increase is death. It's easy to see that increasing entropy is very dangerous to life, because if it increases to a certain level, it will die. So how do organisms deal with this in order to survive? The answer is the subject of this part of our discussion. 4. Life must survive on negentropy. So what is negentropy? Well, it's easy to understand. Entropy is a measure of how chaotic a system is. Negative entropy is a reduction in the amount of chaos in a system. So how does a living thing introduce negative entropy from the outside? This process is very familiar to us. Eating, drinking, breathing, sleeping. The biological equivalent is called metabolism. In other words, through metabolism, an organism introduces a series of negative entropies into itself to compensate for the positive entropies generated by its life activities. It was on the basis of this analysis Schrödinger had his idea, life must live on negentropy. He said that organisms have an amazing gift, the ability to arrange order within themselves, or to draw order from the right environment to prevent their atoms from descending into chaos. From this point of view, what makes life so amazing is its ability to gain negative entropy in a world of ever-increasing entropy. Schrödinger's statement is remarkable. He has struck at the very essence of the physics of life's activities. He explained the fundamental problems of biology through the lens of quantum mechanics. Along with this theory, we are able to explain many of the phenomena of life. For example, have you ever wondered why our bodies constantly give off heat? Actually, from an entropic point of view, from an entropy perspective, the body's heat dissipation is not an accidental phenomenon, but a necessary behavior. It's a necessary behavior because our bodies are constantly generating entropy, and by dissipating heat, it is lowering its own temperature. It's actually removing excess entropy from the body. Similarly, why are warm-blooded animals more energetic than cold-blooded animals? That's also related to entropy, because warm-blooded animals have a higher body temperature, and the temperature difference with the environment is greater. The body dissipates heat more quickly. That means entropy can dissipate faster. So warm-blooded animals can withstand more intense life activities than cold-blooded animals. They run faster, they jump higher, and their brains are smarter. Based on what Schrödinger said about life and entropy, we can extend it quite a bit. The entropy of life has a tendency to increase and gradually become chaotic. If entropy is allowed to increase, then life will come to an end. When some people choose to do whatever they want with their lives, they're letting life go into chaos and entropy. What can we do about it? Schrödinger already told us. That is to make a living as a rich businessman and keep buying order from the outside world. Try to make your life more self-disciplined, clear, organized, and positive. That's the way to face life. That's what life requires of us. Because every system will spontaneously go from order to disorder. The fact that entropy increases has led people to deduce the ultimate end of the universe and the ultimate direction of life. It's called the heat silence theory. 5. The thermal silence of the universe. Will the universe eventually become disordered and die? According to the second law of thermodynamics, the universe is also an isolated system. So the entropy of the universe will increase over time, from order to disorder. In September 1867, Rudolf Clausius, the author of the second law of thermodynamics, proposed that when the entropy of the universe has reached its maximum, all other effective energy in the universe has been converted into heat. The temperatures of all substances have averaged out and stabilized at the same level, reaching thermal equilibrium. This state is called thermal rest. There's no energy left in the universe to keep things moving or to sustain life. At that point, the universe would be dead. There would be no life forms in the universe. This is the hot silence theory. The idea of a thermal desiccation caused an uproar in the scientific community. Will the universe eventually reach a hot silence and become a dead, lifeless place? Some scientists have raised objections to this question. One of the greatest challenges to this idea came from Pangil. In 1890, Pangil pointed out in his book Principles of Mechanics that any mechanical model can only be limited to a finite system of motion. That is, in a closed system of finite dimensions. In other words, in a closed system of finite size, the motion of an object begins with order, increases in entropy, and eventually reaches a state of disorder. But the second law of thermodynamics is derived from a finite world. It cannot be applied to an infinite universe. At this point, the debate shifted to whether or not the universe was infinite in space. It wasn't until the 1960s and 1970s, when the Big Bang model of the universe was gradually accepted by the astrophysical community, that the debate over the thermal silence theory finally reached an epochal turning point. The Big Bang theory provided evidence that the universe was expanding at an accelerated rate. And because it's expanding so fast, some neighboring galaxies far from the center of the universe are moving away from each other faster than the speed of light. Why is that? Since we explained the reasons in detail in our last video, we won't repeat them here. But since some galaxies are moving away from each other faster than the speed of light, then there can never be a thermal equilibrium between all the radiation and particles in the universe. That's because the particles in one galaxy can never move to carry heat to another galaxy that's far away from it. These galaxies, moving away from each other faster than the speed of light, are each a separate system. Humanity has finally awakened from a centuries-old nightmare. It was certain that a state of cosmic hot silence would never come. However, it seems that humanity's joy has come a little too soon. Even though the thermodynamic hot silence of the universe will never come, but the destiny of the universe will not become more optimistic. Even if the universe is not in a state of thermal quiescence, a state of cosmic contraction, as suggested by the Big Bang theory, would be catastrophic for all life in the universe. Of course, we shouldn't be discouraged. Our descendants and the life of the universe have trillions of years to deal with this last great event. Perhaps there are limits to our understanding of life. Even our understanding of life and death has limitations. Like DNA, which we mentioned earlier. We often say that the purpose of life is to perpetuate genes, although all living things die. But the DNA in the body of a living being, in one form or another, replicates and lives on in the next generation. The cell trades its life for the survival of its DNA. This means that as long as it's good for the DNA's genetic code, organisms can carry on the DNA's message by converting it into energy through aging and death. Perhaps the fundamental purpose of life is to ensure the survival of DNA information, and DNA is the fundamental life form. Perhaps from a cosmic perspective, the distinction between life and non-life is not so important, because everything in the universe is made of the same elements on the periodic table. Does that mean that everything in the universe, everything that makes up the universe, is a living thing? We humans just haven't realized it yet. I'll leave it up to you to find out. But whatever your answer, one thing is certain. In terms of the physics that apply to the universe as a whole, life has fought entropy by avoiding disruption of its internal order. The entropy of living things tends to increase and gradually become chaotic. So, as a human being, we live only once. We shouldn't choose to do whatever we want with our life, because we're letting life go into chaos and entropy. Schrödinger has already told us that the way to deal with decay is to live on negative entropy, to maintain order. Try to make your life more disciplined, clear, organized, positive. This is the right attitude towards life. That's what life requires of us. Thank you for listening to Audible Wisdom. If you found this episode useful, don't forget to share it with your family and friends. See you next time.